My name is David Roberts. I happen to be 71. Really feel like I should be 61, but I am 71. Married for 50 years. I live in Fredericton, NB. I'm a retired teacher and was a former Assistant Deputy Minister of Education here in New Brunswick, responsible for all the Anglophone schools and teachers. And I'm currently the president of C21 Canada, which is a national consulting company for 21st century learning and innovation. From the interest perspective, I have 1,001 interests, and it really depends on the day, but they tend to circumvent around educational innovation, children, grandchildren, pickleball, ice hockey, identifying ways to stay healthy and happy. That's what I do, and that's who I am. We as a family were very involved with Ironman racing around the world. And after one race in 2012 in Mount Tremblant, Quebec, the whole training for the year previous to this race seemed to be a hard year of training for some reason, not sure why. After several days of nauseating testing, they found out that I had what was called Idiopathic Pulmonary Fibrosis, which is sort of fibrous tissue in my lungs, and therefore the elasticity of the lungs no longer functioned the way it was supposed to function. So that was October 2012. I spent the next 5 years basically in a terminal mode, right? Because the reality is that you're going to die from this in 4 to 6 years. It wasn't until, honestly, to be quite frank, it wasn't until year 4 after being identified with IPF that the thought or even the consideration of a transplant. I was up in Toronto dealing with a respirologist up there. He said, "David, have you ever given some thought to a transplant?" Well, to be quite frank, I really never had. I never thought I'd be eligible, nor did I thought I would even perhaps the possibility of surviving it exist. But anyway, so that journey began. And when you're on a journey headed toward the reality being, if you don't take this journey, you're going to die in the near term. And the reality being, if you take this journey, there's certain steps and hoops you have to go through in order to qualify to be on the transplant list. A transplant comes down to being in shape enough or fit enough to take a transplant operation. If there's an organ that becomes available, there's two things that have to fit somewhat perfectly: blood type and size. Because I'm 6'4", I can't necessarily take a set of lungs from a 5'6" person. They wouldn't fit. I had been eligible to be part of the transplant process, but not necessarily on that final list until I flew from Arizona to Toronto, being very sick at the time. Within 48 hours, I was now on the transplant list because I was sick enough to be on that final list. And within 14 days of being on the list, I was transplanted, which is rather quick. A lot of people get on the transplant list, and somewhere between 30 days and a year and a half, they get a transplant. I think one of the misconceptions, Anne, about lung transplants is that, oh, goody, I'm going to get a new set of lungs. Well, not really. It's like, oh, goody, you're going to get a second chance at life, but you're getting a second-hand pair of lungs. And in order for your body to accept those lungs, they have to kill all the antibodies in your body that would attack a foreign object, being your new lungs. Because it's a 724 proposition that when you're post-transplant, you're on anti-rejection drugs for the remainder of your life. The thing about, as much as the transplant and the lungs are an absolute gift, it's not forever and forever. There's a time span that's involved, and you've got to appreciate that time span, but also recognize, do everything in your power to extend that time. You know, when all of a sudden someone tells you this sort of earth-shaking news that you have a terminal lung disease, your first reaction is, oh, poor me. But your second reaction is, gee, I wonder what I can do about that, or who can I talk to? Where can I go for help? And now the Lung Association in New Brunswick became important to me, and I probably have never articulated it back to them, and I should have, because they became that voice in the woods, talk about loneliness, that had some value to add. And the value they added was, when I had to go to Toronto on a number of occasions, they gave me insights as to where to go for accommodations, where to stay, what programs or processes or procedures are out there for someone who's in sort of that just-in-time information point in their life. and I love Barb. A very excitable person. I get excited about a lot of things too, but not quite as much as Barb. Which is a fun voice to be, was a fun voice for me to be around and just to talk to. And also, as excitable as she was and is, she also was that voice of insight and calm at a time where you needed that as well. One thing you know about a transplant, when you come out of a transplant operation, you see the world differently. You see it as black and white. The world prior to a lung transplant was gray. Everything, this and that and maybe and not sure, could, not possibly. It's black and white. So you tend post-transplant to tell more truth than you perhaps should. But it's a recognition that life isn't that long, and you better say what needs to be said at a time it needs to be said. So I did appreciate and have appreciated the MB Lung Association, but also appreciate the fact that they've reached out to people that I interact with too in this province who've gone through transplant and understand their level of appreciation as well. So there. A question that's always asked of me, no matter what situation I'm in, what changed? All I can say is everything. Everything changed. Everything required some differential approach. Everything required some modification, some rethinking, some readjusting, some readapting. You learn to adapt. You learn to be resilient. You learn to figure out ways to solve challenges that exist in your life. And that in and of itself is not a bad way to live your day. I still spend an inordinate amount of time with children, particularly grandchildren this day and age, which is fun. I play a lot of a sport called pickleball. I play Nooners hockey still twice a week during the wintertime. The other question that came up, sorry, I always thought it was a bit of a dumb question. People ask, if you had to do over again, would you do it again? Well, yes, because otherwise I'd be dead. So I guess it's a recognition that for those out there even considering a transplant, recognition that being alive beats the hell out of being dead.